Hey everybody, Travis Bowman here. Let's do another video on our friend the Sega Dreamcast, my favorite console of all time. We've got a very interesting and controversial topic on the table today, collecting for the Sega Dreamcast, collecting games for the Sega Dreamcast versus going with another option like the Dreamcast GDEMU or the Mode, an optical drive emulator that's designed to have all your games on an SD card. Now there are a lot of games for the Sega Dreamcast that you can still get for a decent price. Most of the library is like at the $20 or $30 range at the time of this video in my opinion, and you know, depending on the game, some of the games are more desirable, more rare. Some of these games can get upwards of $300. And that is absolutely insane considering what you're paying for. Yes, you're paying for a legitimate copy of the game, but you're also just paying for a CD jewel case with a disc inside of it. A lot of people have a very strong nostalgia for the Sega Dreamcast, and I'm in that group 100%. However, it's not like it used to be, my friends. You know, collecting this stuff 10, 15 years ago, it was so much cheaper than it is now. So the question is it worth it? It depends. It depends on what you're trying to go for. But there are a few things that we should have on the table for discussion regarding collecting and what you need to worry about if you're going to get into something like this. I think the number one thing besides price is conditioning and scarcity. Now, I'm from Arkansas. I'm from the capital city of Little Rock, and Dreamcast games are not easy to find in my area. And if they are, they're usually somewhere in a display case with a hefty price tag attached to them. It can be really difficult to find Dreamcast games locally, so if you're like me, you can't find these games in your area, you're more likely to spend a lot of time on websites like eBay and Mercari. And to be honest with you, most of my Dreamcast library has come from those websites. One thing I wanted to bring to your attention is that these are disc-based games. They're on GD-ROMs. And Sega has never been the best as far as their CD quality. These discs can become very scratched, and it's really hit or miss. You know, you never know what you're gonna get. For example, what I have on the table right here in front of us is Zombie Revenge. It's a wonderful Dreamcast game, very arcadey style Dreamcast game that pairs with that arcade stick back there extremely well. So I'm missing the manual. I got this in a lot of Dreamcast games. It sucks to not have the manual because I like things to be complete. Let's take a look at that disc. That is shiny, is it not? That is a beautiful, shiny disc. From your perspective, I'm sure you can see this and know that it looks brand spanking new. And it should, because I've paid to have this resurfaced professionally. Luckily, I'm kind of sort of neighbors with a YouTuber named Retro Rick. He's got Retro Rick's Game Point, which is about 40 minutes away from where I live. So he's got a very, very high quality professional resurfacer machine, but it's probably one of the best ones that you can get. And I've taken this disc to him to have it resurfaced because my Dreamcast would not read it. So I'm going to try to show you this as best I can on camera. You can kind of sort of see it up at the very top. You see that Dreamcast in the background wiggling back there? There's a little teeny tiny mark right up in here, right below my middle finger right there. And that's all she wrote, ladies and gentlemen. That's all it takes. I've had this resurfaced twice now, and this game will boot to the menu. It will allow me to select arcade or original mode. I've tried them both. As soon as that happens, boom, the game will not read. And that's a damn shame considering that this disc, it otherwise is in pretty perfect condition, but I cannot get that one little scritchy scratch out of this disc. So I hate to caution you and bring you guys up to speed on this stuff, but I've been trying to get all these Dreamcast games to add to my collection, and I've come across some of these games that look fine and have no scratches, but it's the under the surface scratches that you kind of have to worry about. If it's too deep of a scratch, there's not much you can do about it. But that being said, I've got some games that are heavily scratched, but they're just surface scratches, and my Dreamcast has no problem reading them. So you can see, you know, the frustration there. It's like gambling. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm not a big fan of gambling. I like to hang on to my money and know what I'm getting when I spend that money. So that's something to keep in mind. You have to kind of be careful. So if you're going to buy Dreamcast games online, I would highly recommend that you check those return policies. brings me to another subject, and that's the Dreamcast in general. Your Dreamcast. Think of your Dreamcast right now. How's that disk drive doing these days? You know, it's extremely old at this point. We're around 30 years old for that disk drive. It's crazy to think about, but we're getting on up there. Now, those disk drives, once the laser goes bad, you're pretty much screwed. Something else has come to my attention regarding this. Those disk drives, they're called GD-ROM drives. They have capacitors inside of them, and you have to kind of pry them open to get to them. Capacitors need to be changed. And for a disk drive for the Sega Dreamcast, that's no exception either. You know, you need to change your capacitors on your power supplies on your consoles that are getting old, and sometimes you can do that on your disk drive. This is something that was brought to my attention not that long ago, and I did not realize that this could be done. You need to have those capacitors replaced, and sure enough, I had some perfectly looking discs that I was trying to play on my sports Dreamcast that I got a few months ago, and they just would not read, and I could not figure out why. I did your typical treatment for your Dreamcast laser. Get a Q-tip with some isopropyl alcohol and rub that laser, get it nice and clean. Try to get all the dirt and grime off of it, nothing. And some people have experimented with adjusting the potentiometer, and if you don't have a multimeter, I would not recommend doing that because you have such a high probability of damaging it even further, and it's just not a good idea. But I found that replacing those capacitors and finding somebody that can do a steady job like that for you with steady hands is the way to go, because my Dreamcast is reading games better than it ever has now with that new set of capacitors on that GD-ROM drive. So you might take that into consideration if you've got a Dreamcast that is just not reading games that well. If you're like me, you just have nostalgia for this stuff and you like the hunt. You know, a lot of people will know what I'm talking about when I use that phrase. You know, it's the same phrase as out in the wild. You know, I found this out in the wild, you know. It's so much fun to try to hunt this stuff down, the stuff that's nostalgic for us that we've had since we were kids, you know. It's so much fun to try to find this, and it's just taking the wind out of your sail knowing that it's not in your area anymore. You have to go out of your way and get online to order this stuff. But, you know, Mercari is a great site. You can make offers on pretty much everything that you have on there, and maybe somebody's trying to get rid of it. They'll accept a lower offer than you might imagine. There's no way to know unless you try. The Dreamcast is still one of my favorite consoles of all time. I really, really love it. And the GDMU is an option for those of you that aren't interested in spending all these high prices on some of these games. But to be clear, the games that I have, I did not pay a huge arm and a leg for. I mean, of course, there are a few that I had to pay over the $100 mark to get. But most of these are, you know, $60, $70 and below, which is kind of what they were when they first came out, right? It's no different than paying for a new game now, but you have that physical copy of this game that you can cherish forever. You can put it in your Dreamcast. You know, I think Corey from My Life in Gaming, one of my favorite YouTubers, he said something that I wish he never said because it kind of got in my head, and I've not been able to get it out ever since. You know, I've got two Dreamcasts on the table here. I've got the sports Dreamcast with the GD-ROM drive still intact, and I've got the one on the left that has the GDMU installed. So I've got multiple ways of playing Sega Dreamcast games, whether it's physical copies or playing it through an SD card. But he said something on his YouTube channel a while ago that just kind of stuck with me, and that was, I feel like I appreciate a game more if I paid for it. And damn it if that's not hitting home for me. I don't know about you guys, but for me, that really hits home. Like, you know, I paid for this right here. I paid for these two classic games right here, Marvel vs. Capcom and Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Did I overpay? Probably. To be honest, I got Marvel vs. Capcom for a decent price, but Marvel vs. Capcom 2, it's just one of those games that is getting scarcer and scarcer, and it's one of the best games ever made. One of the best fighting games ever made. It's legendary at this point.
I wanna take you for a ride. I wanna take you for a ride. I wanna take you for a ride.
I remember finding this game for like $50 in 2015, and I passed on it because I'm like, I'm not spending $50 on a Dreamcast game. And here we are, years later, and I spent way more than that just to have this game in my collection. But it's a piece of history, and that's another thing. This is a piece of history. It's a piece of gaming history, and it's so nice to be able to look upon your collection and be like, yeah, this was a time in my life that I really, really enjoyed being a part of, and now I have these games here to help me celebrate those memories. So in addition to owning and playing these really rare and expensive games, the Dreamcast was a special case because of the different peripherals that went with them. For example, this strange guy right here, Caution Seaman. It is a pet simulator with a touch of weirdness that you've likely never seen before. Leonard Nimoy of Star Trek is the game's narrator, and it's really difficult for me to describe this game, but it's a really cool piece of gaming history because it comes with a microphone that you plug into your Dreamcast controller, and you can actually talk to this pet. And what's crazy is that this came out close to the turn of the century in the year 2000, and it's absolutely crazy how accurate that this is. It's such a crazy experience for the time because you use that microphone, you talk to this fake thing inside your Sega Dreamcast, and it remembers you. It learns things about you, and it will bring it up long after you've forgotten that you've told this thing about it. It's really, really interesting, and it's a piece of gaming history. And you cannot enjoy this game without that microphone. It's not the same thing. You can't even play it without using the microphone, which is insane. Take a look at the arcade stick that I've got back there on the back left. It's a much better experience to play Marvel vs. Capcom with a 6-button arcade controller. And a lot of games are so much better when using a controller like that. That's another thing to take into account is collecting the hardware. That's my favorite thing about the Sega Dreamcast. That's why I put off collecting the games for so long, is because I was more interested in the hardware just because there's so many different options for all these different games for the Sega Dreamcast. Take a look over here on the right. We've got the twin stick for the Sega Dreamcast over there. Now this is perfectly paired with a game called Virtual On. Very interesting game. Very interesting game. Arguably, playing with the controller is almost impossible. It's so hard to play this game with the controller. I know people have done it. It's just a different experience altogether. Now, this peripheral is a Japanese exclusive. We never got that over here in the States. So here are the two different games. We've got Virtual On America and then Virtual On for Japan. It's hard to see it right now, but if I turn these over here, that Japanese jewel case is a hell of a lot thicker than the American one. And that's because this was designed to be released together, this game and that twin stick over there. So when we open this up, that manual is a thick boy. That is a huge manual. And when we pull it out, look at how crazy high quality this is. You know, this is a high quality manual. There is so much in here that will tell you all about the controls and the design of this game. And it is a damn shame because all of it is in Japanese, and it's very difficult for me to understand Japanese without knowing how to speak, read, and write the language. So there's all sorts of things to talk about in this video. I don't want to be the only one flapping my gab about it. I want this to be a discussion video, so I want to know what you guys think. Is it worth it in 2024 and beyond to pay these prices for these Dreamcast games and peripherals? Or do you prefer to go the GDMU route? So here's the thing. I've got all these Dreamcast games on the table, but I've got an SD card right here that's 256 gigabytes. And that entire Dreamcast library, most of the good games anyway, are on that SD card. So you tell me, which one is more worth it to you? Would you consider yourself to be a Dreamcast collector? What is the best thing in your Dreamcast collection that you spent the most money on, or just the thing that you love the most about the Sega Dreamcast? What do you guys think? Let me know all the answers to those questions in the comments section below. Thank you.